In the 2020, there was a huge boom with the pandemic, and people were just staying in. So that's where the video game industry benefited from, just like higher player counts and even like paid views on Twitch streams and all of that. So once that is not the case anymore and people are outside, that has actually hurt not only like the amount of traffic that these like live streamers are seeing. So it's like also a question of management of the project of that property, whether or not like the new owner knows what to do with that business and if they can like make that more profitable, or if they just like bought it and kind of skinned it and tried to get rid of the people there.
Today we are joined by Shannon Liao, the reporter at the Washington Post, who, like me, we've both been covering sort of the layoffs that are happening across the gaming industry, which this week kind of feels, unfortunately, a little bit like the touchstone moment. I mean, a few of these layoffs have been happening over the past couple of months, but this week has been sort of a massive slog. Chief among those is Microsoft. Microsoft laid off 10,000 employees, including some of the people that were in the gaming departments there that were focused on development, including at 343 and Bethesda Softworks. Google today laid off 12,000 people, and we're not necessarily sure how that quite breaks down yet. I think there are still reporters out there making phone calls trying to figure that out. And then also earlier this week, Riot Games made a small reduction in workforce of about 46 people. Several of the esports teams have also made reductions in workforces. I'm actively, as we're on this space, trying to figure out the reduction in workforce happening at Team Liquid. There was one last week at 100 Thieves as well that was about 14 to 17% of their workforce. And so it is a tough time to be working kind of in the gaming industry more broadly. And Shannon's been doing a lot of reporting on this. But we'll start off on a lighter note. Shannon, how are you? How's work been this week?
Hey Jacob, it's so good to be on your show. Yeah, I mean, work has been very hectic. We started off with the New York Game Awards on Tuesday, and now we're ending the week with tons of layoffs across the board, like you mentioned, not just in gaming, but also in games media and also in tech. So, yeah, we've just been scrambling over here. And the Washington Post also has layoffs, so we're not exempt from that either. Hope work has been good for you. How have you been doing?
I've been okay. It's been chaotic as well. I think, speaking candidly, like being an entrepreneur in this environment is equally as tough, especially because business lending is down. And so like getting any sort of advance on anything is tough. And then, financial investments is down as well, especially in gaming, where I think so many people have, for better or for worse, torched a lot of investor money over the past 3 to 4 years and thought that investments would be a never ending flowing river, basically, and that you could always tap something else. I think we're finding out something very different now, right? Given the environment. Mm-hmm. But I want to ask Shannon, from the reporting you've done, I've seen a lot of sort of speculation as to why these layoffs are happening, whether that be that people got kind of hired a little bit too aggressively during the pandemic, and some of the companies that were being very successful, online media, et cetera, that had higher engagement during the pandemic. And so maybe they're correcting backwards to kind of a more stable space. Or in the case of just, general downturn in the economy, if you had to sort of diagnose some of the companies that you're looking at right now and saying, what is the problem? Why are they making these reductions in force? What would you say that is? What is your diagnosis?
Yeah, actually, we have a story coming out on this, hopefully within the hour. But so it's good that you're asking me this. I've been trying to ask each gaming company, like Riot Games sent me their statement, and Unity is also explaining. A lot of this is due to the pending recession that hasn't happened yet, that people are, worried about, and they're thinking like the market is going to contract. And to correct for that, as the prices of milk and everything increases. The companies, a lot of these are public companies, they want to keep profitability up and look good for their shareholders, for investors, and their next earnings call. And if other companies are all doing layoffs, then it's hard to be the one company that's not doing layoffs and for some reason keep employees. And at the same time, the same companies are still hiring for more people, so they are cutting the jobs that they think are less profitable, or just changing priorities around. So Unity, for instance, they said they were shutting down the sports department, which was working on a project that would help you watch live events from different angles. And that was something that a technology that they are not going to work on anymore, as they prioritize something else, like probably their core technology, like game software, game engines. So
in terms of sort of the places that you're saying most affected, is there any sort of trend line that you are seeing in specific? If you were to think about all the companies that are making layoffs, are there departments that are the same being affected across the board, or does it kind of just feel like each company is a little bit different from one another in that regard?
So are you saying that the companies are the same in terms of what was the question again?
Well, so like if you look at like Google and Microsoft and some of the others, like Unity, Riot, etc., are there specific departments that are shared in between those companies? So like whether it be like talent acquisition or HR and recruiting, sales, like is there any sort of connection between the bit, basically?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I haven't looked across the board. Let's see. So like, I mean, one thing we can definitely say is a trend that you can see is like Unity, shutting down sports departments. Riot did some layoffs in publishing and also in esports. So it does seem like there's a connection there of the esports section, where it'd be like sporting events are the ones being hit. It seems like there are a lot of people going out and they have more time to find entertainment outside, and then there's more competition of like which event are they going to attend, and is it, and also as cover the esports industry, advertisers are pulling out and stopping their deals, so that also uh, is an indication that that market is not very healthy, or that people are afraid the market will be unhealthy, so they're just like planning ahead of time. So that's one trend I saw. And then also Google Stadia shut down January 18th. And I just reached out to Google asking if the 12,000 jobs included the Stadia jobs, or if it's just if that's already like layoffs that happened previously, so that doesn't count. And Google said they declined to comment. There are no details there. But at the same time, Microsoft has like Halo products, Halo developers who are laid off as well. So I don't really know there's like a trend within Google because we don't have enough details there, but it does seem like the products that people were not supporting as much are the ones that the companies are pulling back from.
Well, it feels like, I mean, more broadly, it's entertainment, right? And I think this is the one thing I've been tracking a lot as well, is we saw sort of a pandemic spike when everybody's inside, exactly like you just alluded to in your answer, when, people are now getting back out and they're living more regular lives as we have vaccines and things are a little bit more stabilizing. Infection rate is down around COVID. It's not as much of a sort of national and international concern as it was 2.5 years ago during 2020. And so in 2020, we saw this massive spike in all entertainment, the streaming platforms, which have also been affected by some of the layoffs and budget cuts as well. Places like Twitch, places like Google, and a bunch of the game developers, because people were just playing games more, right? They had more time to dedicate because their social lives were basically either all online or non-existent. And so what are your thoughts there in terms of like how that is affecting it? Do we see sort of more broadly like entertainment becoming devalued among all of these various different companies?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I was talking to some financial analysts or people who either like are in charge of like game investments, or they at least work with those other investors and venture capital funds, and they said the same thing of like in the 2020 there was a huge boom with the pandemic, and people were just staying in. So that's where the video game industry benefited from, just like higher player counts and even like paid views on Twitch streams and all of that. So once that is not the case anymore and people are outside, that has actually hurt not only like the amount of traffic that these like live streamers are seeing, and also just like like the influencer network is part of like what helps promote these games people are playing, and then the developers are working in the game. So it's this entire ecosystem that's like benefiting from more hype around video games like about 2-3 years ago, and when that's not present, investors and shareholders and everyone are like changing their priorities and to focus more on other parts of their business that they think are more consistent. That definitely hurts and like results in these layoffs. But at the same time, like games journalism, like games media, seeing layoffs, like I think Giant Bomb and GameSpot were bought by Fandom just before those layoffs. Yep. And so it's like also a question of management of the project of that property, whether or not like the new owner knows what to do with that business and if they can like make that more profitable, or if they just like bought it and kind of skinned it and tried to get rid of the people there. So yeah, it's a I hope I answered your question there, but yeah, it's not. This is the stage that we're in now. Hopefully, the recession doesn't happen. But yeah.
Well, games media is an intriguing one. I mean, sitting here talking to two games reporters in this discussion, like I think, having been a part of Layoffs, I think it's extremely hard in this with this particular audience segment, young people, gamers, etc. I don't think that they maybe this is a little aggressive, but I don't think that they give a shit about brands nearly as much as maybe sort of older demos do, and feeling like, credibility, thinking about like, is this a credible source, and maybe some of the other things that older audiences assess when they're consuming their media. And so like they're just happy to get the news from wherever. They're not as particular or picky in it. And so like I think we've seen a huge scaling back in gaming media, not just more recently the GameSpot and Giant Bomb groups, but also Fanbyte completely shut down last year, and like their traffic was not nearly anywhere that you could make that a profitable business. G4 completely closed as well, which was a subsidiary of Comcast. It feels like games media is kind of on this like specific tightrope that like, yeah, it's been on before, but it feels a little bit maybe more dire now than it ever has. At least I feel that way, and reading kind of how everybody's feeling.
Yeah, it really sucks. I have like friends in the industry, obviously, that want to find another job. Like, they don't like their current job, or are laid off already, so they're looking for jobs. And it's a very competitive market now. If there's so many people who are looking at the same time, and jobs are being cut. So yeah, it's pretty bad. I don't know if it's like the worst, because there's always like this threat of like a recession every few years. I remember when I started in I worked for The Verge as well, and they also Vox Media had some layoffs today too. They cut 7% of their staff. But yeah, like back in 2017, I know that like even back then the managers were talking about, oh, we might have a recession, so don't count on becoming full time here. Don't count on having a job. Don't count on a raise, because like we don't know. So that was like several years ago, and then there was no recession, but they still kind of have that fear every once in a while. And I think especially journalism, like just the funding is not really there. The gamers are not really reading some of the times, and so there's just not as much support.
Yeah, they have different content preferences. I think it's the one thing that sort of traditional media, which is what props up a lot of the games websites, hasn't quite figured out, is that like they don't want to consume the content in the same way. It's not that they like don't appreciate quality, is that the quality to them and presentation is very different than like what a lot of these publishers are used to publishing. But you made a good point there, and I listen to a lot of like financial sort of business oriented podcasts and read a bunch of that. A lot of these businesses that currently exist in entertainment, gaming, chief among those, it has never really faced a major recession since it became as relevant as it is today. If you think about it, like, well, the last major recession is in 2008, and in 2008, gaming was big. It was a big entertainment category. It wasn't the biggest entertainment category as it is now by audience size. And so this is like gaming's true first recession, and it's weird way. And I think that's something that we've seen layoffs like over the past 20 years or whatever, but nonetheless we haven't seen it in this economic environment. And I think that's something that I'm really intrigued to see, when we reflect on it, how it was different than sort of like what is routine, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I didn't think of it like that, because the gaming industry has been around like since like, I don't know, you can count. Everyone has like a different like start date, but like maybe the 80s. So 2008 there was gaming, but I guess it was like consoles, and it was a lot more traditional. So this part of gaming where after the .com bubble, after all the social media boom, and like Twitch streaming took off, this is totally different. But at the same time, like I did write a story last year about how gaming has always been considered recession proof. Back in 2008, it was an industry that, especially like Nintendo consoles were being sold, and those were like still selling super well when people were looking for jobs, because like people wanted entertainment that was cheap.
Downtime.
That's gaming.
Yeah, exactly.
and you can, you buy one console, you buy a couple games, you don't have to like spend any more money after that, so you're set. So gaming was actually considered like safe from the recession. This time around, I did ask a bunch of industry analysts, and like, why are there even layoffs then in that case? Why is the gaming industry also contracting? And it's because maybe gaming is not actually as recession proof as we thought. It was kind of just like a reputation that it had. But I do think that like within the tech, gaming, and other industries, like especially like tech companies, they still see gaming as an opportunity, and so there isn't like, I mean, I won't say like it isn't a severe layoff, but I will say that like when the companies are thinking about what's the next profitable thing for them, what should they focus on? They do think about like continuing to invest in gaming, even if Stadia is gone. I don't think like Google is going to pull out of investing in gaming entirely. So there is like that silver lining, even though it looks really bad.
It's hard to differentiate what is a failed product to versus what is sort of what is a layoff that is, unexpected, right? Like if the Stadia team is slashed, there is a business logical sense to do that. Stadia was an abject failure, right? Like you can like, let's call it a spade here. It didn't work, right? Like game streaming is just not like, game streaming is not what, like, it's just not ready. Like, I wrote a piece last year about internet speeds, and I went and did like a bunch of data analysis looking at sort of like how much does it cost to have a internet connection, Ethernet connection that basically supports you to be able to play games on your television in that streaming environment, right? And because it's becoming something all the developers, Microsoft and others too, are putting more and more resources into developing. And in most of the places in the US, it is like $100+ a month in internet cost, right? Like to even just have a connection that is 25 megabytes or more per second, which is what you need to be able to sustain that. And so like, I don't think we're there. Like that makes total sense logically why something like Stadia gets slashed. But then there are the layoffs in places like Microsoft and elsewhere and Riot, that it's like they are having things that are performing. And this is just, their layoffs in lieu of other things, not just like product abject failure, basically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, cloud gaming definitely needs like high speed internet, and not everyone has that. And even though after Stadia shut down, I talked to other cloud gaming companies, or like major companies like Logitech or Nvidia, like just the ones that have a cloud gaming product, they still don't have a solution to that issue of if you don't have high speed internet, that you can't really use it. So that's something that is still ongoing, and that's why like this week I also covered the GDC, like game developers survey, and they were skeptical about the metaverse. They said, look at cloud gaming and how it's doing, and comparing the metaverse to cloud gaming, and in terms of like promises that haven't been achieved yet. And then your second point was I think Riot's layoffs were much smaller compared to the scale of Microsoft or Google. And when I talked to them, they said they were focusing on like publishing roles. So there's probably more to dig into of like what exactly went wrong there, and what are they trying to deprioritize. But I don't have that information yet. Maybe we can work on that next. But yeah.
You're doing a good job of feeding me where I want to go here. I wanted to ask you about, I saw your story about the metaverse, and I want to talk about specifically about Meta, who is the sort of, the lead company in this very specific space. They also had, I believe, Q3 or Q4 layoffs, pretty significant Q3, Q4 layoffs last year. And seems like they didn't touch maybe their Oculus and virtual reality department as heavily as some of the other things that they were cutting. I think they made some cuts, but it maybe not as effective if you were to boil it down to percentage points. And they still seem, despite Oculus being it's a great machine. I don't want to diss the machine. I have one. They're fun. They're very enjoyable as a gamer. But like, I think your story was pretty on the nose. Like basically, the metaverse is not here yet. It is another thing that like is more of an idea than it is a actual product, and a thing that people can really get into from a consumer perspective. And so you look at Meta continually to double down on investment, or double down to invest in that. But what are your thoughts about like where that's going to go now, and if it actually has some viability under it?
Yeah. What are my thoughts on where the metaverse is going, or where Meta
And
is going?
specifically Meta's investment in it, like where,
Okay.
where they are going, and if there's a sort of light at the end of the tunnel, because they're bleeding money like
Mm.
crazy on their that specific development.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that Facebook has been a company that, a lot of their products were stagnating over the years, but they continue to invest. That's one where they specifically were investing super hard in the metaverse, so that they changed their name to Meta,
Yep.
and then after that happened, then they pulled back from investing in the metaverse, and that was like a huge headline of people being like, okay, well, aren't you like the most bullish company on the metaverse, and you're also doubting it? And that's also reflective of the article I just published, which was, over 40% of game developers don't believe that the metaverse can achieve its promise. And that's way higher percentage than the people who believe it can, in terms of believing in Epic Games and Fortnite, or believing in Facebook, which I think they only like 7% believe that Meta would achieve the metaverse promise first. Because, like, first of all, the metaverse promise is very vague. Like, what is that? Um,
Yep.
so like that hasn't been clearly defined by. I mean, it's been defined by many different people who don't agree. And then, you'll have people who say like Second Life is the metaverse, it's already here, or Minecraft is already here. So people talking about the metaverse are super late to it. And then so that just goes on as an ongoing debate. So Meta, I believe that they would probably, continue investing in Oculus and Quest, because like that's such a huge part of their business. It is again like virtual reality. We're talking about a lot of these technologies that are very hyped up and just haven't reached like mass adoption yet. The average person, just like they don't have high speed internet, they don't have the very expensive headset. But also at the same time, we've published a lot of articles here, especially like our very own Gene Park, the Washington Post would write about how the metaverse is not just VR headsets either. So definitely don't make that assumption that it has to be virtual reality either. But yeah, so I think Facebook would probably continue, on its path, even if the hardware is like not the most popular.
I'm going to put you in the seat here. You are the sort of marketing executive at Meta Platforms, and you are tasked with making virtual reality more attractive and accessible. How do you do it?
Wow, that's a tough question. I mean, I feel like honestly that the quick answer is probably just like, this is because I studied marketing, so I actually have an answer for this. But like that was really random. No, like the movie Ready Player One, I think, was like a great way of marketing virtual reality. So if I was a Meta executive, I would just like try to find more Hollywood deals, make another Ready Player One, package it better. Don't base it off of a text that's vaguely transphobic. Just like do another movie where virtual reality looks really good. Like I think Avatar also kind of carries that. So like if people watch that and get hyped for it, maybe. But other than that, I feel you just continue the way that you wait 10 more years and see if 8K gaming has taken off yet, and if virtual reality is finally here.
Yeah, I asked you that just because you're a reporter, like reporting kind of both on, I mean, that survey, right, and kind of how the industry feels about it, and you're also looking at the financial results or lack thereof of that specific category, and so like something's got to give here, right? Like, and I think like it's the number one question for people, for Mark Zuckerberg and Meta and Facebook, is like, when do they either achieve success or give up? Like which one comes first, and how, kind of where are they at, and like what is their sort of tolerance to continue to lose so much money on it? And I think that like that only equals like more layoffs and more, sort of downfall for them if they don't turn it around, basically.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same company that still has Facebook Gaming, hasn't given up on trying to compete in live streaming too. So it's just a lot of different projects. I think like at least the fact that they acquired Oculus, right? So they have that technology, and within VR, the segment of VR in the market, people mostly think of the Meta Quest, or they would go towards that as like their main option if they're thinking of getting a headset. So at least I can carry the business for a while. But I just can't imagine they would shut down the entire thing. And I just think that it's just one of those parts of the business that like they'll just keep holding on to, and see if it ever goes anywhere.
Shifting gears a little bit, in the statement that Riot has said this, but I think some of the other companies have too, that they are, even in lieu of these layoffs, we're still hiring more people in these positions that are open. From your perspective, the reporting you've done so far, I would ask two things. I would ask, one, how many of those positions are rehiring what was laid off to lower cost? Because you generally hire somebody that's less expensive, hire people that haven't been there as long. And then two, how many roles are there to gain out there in gaming versus how many roles are being lost? So if you had to look at, like, I've seen a little bit of numbers, people kind of like searching a bunch of the other developer websites, how they're hiring. So if you had to compare like how they're hiring versus how they're laying off, what is sort of like the net, if you had to sort of give a maybe not a hard number, but like kind of the perspective of like where the industry at is in jobs gained and jobs lost?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I wish I had the data on that. I know we published an article today from the tech team at WAPO, saying that like the tech industry has cut 57,000 jobs. And then for Riot, they did give me the same statement that you probably have, where they cut 46 jobs and they are still recruiting for people
150
within,
plus or something. Yeah.
yeah. So that's definitely like they're still adding more than they're cutting, and you don't hear these companies saying that they're all doing hiring freeze. So they are definitely recruiting for as much, or if not more. I have like interviewed people for the story that's publishing today of saying that after all of the attrition, all the layoffs, the companies are probably going to end up with just the same amount of people they had in the beginning, because they're going to recruit people and they're going to like fill in new roles, and so they're going to start off with like 4,000 people and end with 4,000 people at the end of the day, because that's just kind of how it goes. And like that seems really weird at first for like people who are not as familiar with business, but I think like the reasoning behind that, which you could accept it or not, is just like to reprioritize the roles that weren't making any money, and like maybe the people there were given the chance in some cases to find a different position, but if they couldn't like also change with the business, and then the company just cut them and continue to hire more people anyway. So
Yeah. What's complicating part of this too is that, and I know you've done a lot of reporting on this because I've read a lot of it, is labor unions, which is a very new sort of uncharted path in gaming in particular, but it has been an increasing trend over the past 18 months. We've seen several studios inside a company like Activision Blizzard start to form unions. We've seen others outside of Activision Blizzard as well. It's very clear that, for better or for worse, like gaming workers have had enough, right? Like I think there's been a lot of frustration. It's finally boiling into like some real collective action. And that I think that's also from I've read Steven Totila's reporting on this yesterday, but it's making layoffs, not that this is a bad thing, I'm not framing it as such, it's making layoffs more difficult for a lot of these companies too, which is a good thing for workers. It's fantastic that it's kind of making negotiations have to be a bit more difficult for companies to rid some of these people and not particularly violate labor rights agreements. What are your thoughts about how, more broadly, because I want to talk a lot about unions with you given your reporting, what are your thoughts right now about sort of the changing of the winds in gaming and how unions are affecting sort of workplaces in gaming more broadly?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I've been covering unions for at least a year. I mean, like the first union to really come out of this was the Raven Software one, with the quality assurance testers at Activision Blizzard, and they work on Call of Duty games. And so they were one of the first. And the strategy has been like to kind of start small with a group of quality assurance testers and kind of go from there. And that's carried over to Blizzard Albany, which used to be Vicarious Visions, and also now we have Microsoft unionizing too with ZeniMax, which is aka Bethesda. But yeah, so the union is definitely spreading, and there's like there's like 50% of game developers are supporting unions now, but that's like held steady over the past few years. But for the first time, they actually have gained momentum and have come forward with the unions. I will say that even the one that's like had made the most progress, Raven, is still in bargaining with management, so they haven't actually gotten their contract yet. But the hope is that the union would protect these workers, give them better wages, like protect their jobs. So if they were being laid off, they could at least ask for higher severance and all of that. And the Washington Post also has a union, so it's like that is the process that all the unions are kind of in charge of, is protecting those workers in case they do get laid off, or just like advocating for their rights even when they're working there. So that's I would say that we haven't seen this quite yet because the layoffs just happened this week. But if anything, if people are like out there fearing for their jobs, they might just like be encouraged to join the unions as well, and that could only give them more power. So I think this like trend came up, especially because of like you mentioned, Activision Blizzard. Like once the lawsuit, there's a sexual harassment lawsuit that came out, which is still ongoing from California state. That has kind of pushed workers to kind of finally stand up for, like they are not going to accept these conditions for forever. And uh, uh, through talking to each other, they finally found solidarity. I mean, I talked to the ZeniMax folks, and they had been working on this on unionizing for several years now. So it's all been in the works and finally reaching fruition.
Yeah, I was about to ask you what made it. What do you think's made it boil over? Because gaming. It took so long for gaming to unionize. I mean, unions aren't new in America. There have been labor unions for a long time, and we've seen media more broadly start to unionize more aggressively over the past 10 years across various different employers. It felt like gaming took a long time to catch it, and I guess like if you had to identify very specific pain points from your reporting, what has made it boil over that these games workers finally want to take that collective action?
Yeah, so the very first union, like I mentioned, was Raven Software, the first one to become official, besides Vodia, which was a indie studio that later shut down. But Raven was the workers at Raven were prompted to unionize because they saw that 12 of their contractors had been fired. So this is actually tying back to the layoffs, even because once these 12 contractors were fired. And also the company would say that they're not fired, they're just terminated because their contract is ended. Those workers were, asking for people to hire them back, and also their coworkers were asking for them to be acknowledged, and all of that was ignored for several weeks. They were on strike for a very long time, and during that process, they collected all these like union signature cards and were able to, at least pursue that path forward of trying to stand up in solidarity and organize when the firings and layoffs were ignored. So that was one thing, and also I think it's notable just that the union movement across the industry is coming from quality assurance testers, who are like the most underpaid and mistreated workers according to them, and according to like the data that has been published as well. Just like making, and often cases like $30,000, and just like jobs that are paying so low that they have to live with multiple roommates in like these areas and cities that actually cost a lot of money to live in. So that has prompted those people to step forward and work together, because they still want to be part of the gaming industry. And it seemed like over the course of years, the gaming industry did not help them get higher wages, or told them like, you're just testing games and you're testing bugs, so like your job is not that important, you're replaceable. If you complain to me, then I will just find another contractor. So in the light of that kind of treatment, the workers like standing up for themselves and working together, we're trying to find more of a voice, and work with the union that way. And also because of some of these workers working with the union, that has like led other quality assurance testers to join in, and so it's just become this overarching trend across different companies.
Shannon, I want to ask you something that I saw that I still find incredibly abnormal, but I think it's kind of just speaks to how people working at Activision Blizzard maybe feel about their higher ups. Is we saw the CWA organization that has been kind of superpowering a lot of the unions at Activision Blizzard, behind the Blizzard Albany union, behind the Raven Software union. They are lobbying and supporting in court Microsoft in their sort of quest to acquire Activision Blizzard. They have submitted basically exhibit to say, we support this. The FTC should let it go through because they believe that Microsoft is going to be a net benefit to them. Microsoft made a statement this past summer basically saying that they would recognize unions and that they would negotiate, be fair negotiators. The impetus being Activision Blizzard is not. And we've seen Activision Blizzard engage in what some people have called union busting behavior based off of what they've said to their employees. And so I find it very abnormal that a sort of organizing group like the CWA is supporting a merger that the government is contesting in hopes that, that the new owner will basically be more fair to their workers. I mean, what are your thoughts kind of on where that stands and how people at Activision Blizzard feel about Microsoft and how it may impact employee relationships?
Yeah, this one's very interesting, and thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, just like when the acquisition news first happened in January 2022, everyone was shocked, and I think initially people were not. I think people were just like, "Oh, did Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick just like get rid of the company so he doesn't have to deal with the sexual harassment lawsuits anymore, and he's going to sell it at a pretty
a premium,
penny.
yeah,
Just yeah. So that was like the first take, and then workers were not sure what it meant for them. But as I see, like negotiations with Activision Blizzard for the union have dragged on, and it seems like that they wouldn't conclude until like until Microsoft buys Activision Blizzard. So a lot of these workers are actually just waiting for that merger to close so they can finally start negotiating their contracts or resolve that issue for themselves. And at the same time, the CWA has aligned itself with Microsoft pretty strongly. Last year, they had in June, we actually reported this out, like a agreement to respect all. Maybe it was June, but they're respecting all possible unions from Activision Blizzard, all the workers' rights to vote for a union. And that agreement was actually taken. It was just about Activision Blizzard workers, but by this year, they've actually taken that agreement to stretch it to mean ZeniMax workers will also be supported to unionize, and then you could presume like other parts of Microsoft gaming could be protected if they wanted to unionize too. And so because Microsoft has become a union supporter, then the CWA in turn is like, yeah, we want to support this merger as well. But I would say that in the beginning, like back when this deal was just happening, people hadn't reacted quickly enough yet, and the CWA did not immediately support the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal back in January of last year. And this only came about after they have worked that agreement together. It's kind of like if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And so we'll see what happens after that. But it does seem like all the union talks are going to drag out until that deal is closed. So that's kind of another reason why they want the deal to close so fast.
Well, that deal in particular is extremely confusing to me because we're getting very mixed messaging about where it stands. I think there was that extremely aggressive legal argument that was filed in court as well, basically saying that the FTC's court system, for those unfamiliar, I'll explain a little bit of this actually. So when the FTC brings a competition lawsuit or an anti-competition lawsuit against an entity, in this case Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, two very large corporations that are trying to merge, they can do it one of two ways. They can either take it to federal court and file a lawsuit in federal court, or they can take it into basically an internal board. And this internal board has certain arbiters and certain judges that are a part of this. But if those judges make a decision that the FTC does not like, the FTC is able to appeal, and it's able to appeal to itself. And so in this way that essentially the commissioners, and I believe 3 of 4 of them that sit on the FTC's board, agreed to greenlight the internal complaint against Activision Blizzard and Microsoft, they can essentially just decide themselves what happens if they don't like the initial decision in an appeal. And initially, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard made an argument arguing that was unconstitutional, and it essentially breaks the Constitution's rules against fair trial, basically, right? That's more broadly, I kind of see both sides on that one, but nonetheless. But the fact that the Activision Blizzard Microsoft complaint was brought up internally at the FTC and not in a federal court, I think scares a lot of people that it may not actually happen, because the FTC can actually appeal and decide what they want to do with it in the end. And it's very clear that they care very passionately about this. But then we see, an FTC lawyer said earlier this year, at the beginning of January, that there were no sort of substantive settlement talks between the FTC and Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. But then the following day, we see that very aggressive claim of unconstitutionality withdrawn, which signals, hey, maybe we actually are talking. Maybe we're making a little bit of progress here rather than just keeping the claim there. What is your read on where the Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition is and its likelihood or not, if you had to predict today that it will go through?
Oh, that's such a hard question. Yeah, I can't predict if it's going to go through because, like, I also go around asking all these experts, and half of them are like, "Yeah, it's going to go through for sure," and the other half is like, "No, no, no! Like, this is a chance for Lena Khan and the FTC to like finally block something." But at the same time, I guess I can just give some context of like where things are, and then we can kind of we could just wait and see what happens next. But like so I think also not just like the FTC is one that you have to watch out for, but also the European Union and also the British like competitive markets authority. The three of them are all looking to like investigating Microsoft and Activision Blizzard in this deal to see if they want to approve it or not, and their timing kind of aligns, and depending on how one goes, the other ones might follow suit. So that is interesting to me. I think it's definitely been the case that Microsoft has been pretty open with trying to give as much material as possible to these authorities and trying to like make the deal go through no matter what. And like I even wrote a story where Microsoft had published material saying like cloud gaming is immature, and that's like something that Microsoft had been pushing for years, and they would rather like call it immature so that you can uh, kind of debunk the idea that Activision Blizzard would benefit their cloud gaming service, which would be a monopolistic, so that then the deal shouldn't go through. And Microsoft would rather like insult its own technology than have the deal possibly falter because of the idea like maybe it's being a monopoly. So uh, I would say that like maybe like considering how many resources they have at their disposal, like and if they try by all means necessary to get the deal to pass, and if they are able to convince these authorities, then it seems like it's going pretty well. But I will say that the onlookers are pretty worried that the deal will not go through.
Well, I think a lot of employees that I've spoken to, at least, are also worried for the same reasons we just talked about. Though, like they think Microsoft will be a more fair counterparty to what they're hoping to achieve for themselves, right? And Activision Blizzard has not been a fair counterparty in any sense, trying to make the feet drag as long as humanly possible, basically. So, I think it's to me, it's very interesting, even on the esports side, how much of the games industry right now sort of is hanging by one deal, right? Like that deal will have ripple effects. If it doesn't go through, it will have ripple effects on the rest of the economy. I think it will, in a way, devalue a lot of other game studios as well at a difficult time, because I think because the premium price that Microsoft is paying for Activision Blizzard, it kind of helps the rest of the industry by saying like it's worth this much, even if the market cap on in the public stock market doesn't say it is. It's worth this much. Someone's paying for it, and then if it doesn't go through, I think that there's a world where we see a little bit of the industry take, all valuations go down a little bit as a ripple. And also workers are impacted because now they're dealing with a sort of aggressive counterparty on the union front. And if it does go through, then I think it speaks to sort of gaming's mass relevance as a piece of entertainment, because it is one of the largest tech deals ever, right? Like it's fairly significant.
This is super interesting. It goes back to that survey I wrote about this week as well, because people were game developers were asked if the deal going through is going to help people, if more companies combining forces is going to help the industry. And I think people are skeptical. They think that consolidation is not that great. I would say that like if you value Activision Blizzard at $70 billion, and it's not really actually worth that much money, and you discover that later, if maybe the deal like just falls through, I think that could, and if the valuations for other companies drops as well, that actually maybe isn't such a bad thing. Because like one of the reasons why there are so many layoffs, like as according to financial experts, they think that the valuation of these companies was too high and the investment was too high, and so then they have to start cutting people from there. So if all the valuations just drop a lot, that could actually also benefit. I mean, just like it could make the market more conservative, so that in the future, people can maintain, or just like the headcount that they have at the company will just stay the same. But we don't really know. So there's all these different takes you can have on if the deal would be good or not. And people are also saying like, is Activision Blizzard worth like Guitar Hero and all this $70 billion? And yeah, it's a lot to debate. It's super interesting.
I think we're going to have Ahmad Khan, a friend of ours, come up and speak. He's the Google reporter at CNET. I think he had something to say about Google's layoffs today, which are still evolving. I think both of us are actively keeping up with, trying to figure out. Ahmad, do you want to go ahead and speak?
Hey, Jacob, and hey, Shannon. Thanks for putting on this episode. And it's been a really interesting conversation. And of course, if there are any journalists listening in who are affected by layoffs, I'm very sorry. And I hope you all find some work sooner rather than later. As the Google reporter, it's difficult to kind of cover this broadly because there are just so many different things happening, including Google's own layoffs internally. But if we Jacob, when I reached out saying I wanted to speak about this, I kind of wanted to talk about maybe some of the macro journalism economy and how that's so tied to how the internet works right now. And what's happening right now is that we have monetization that isn't built into the internet, right? Everything is free, therefore it's all attention based. So all these publications are fighting for attention alongside YouTubers and TikTokers and just about everyone else. And what that's forced is obviously this like race to the bottom where everyone's just trying to game search engine optimization so they can get as many clicks as possible. I mean, there's a reason why Polygon has a really large guides team as well as pretty much every other games publication, because they're trying to like siphon these clicks from regular Google searches. And it's unfortunately, it seems that this kind of race to this SEO bottom is going to continue until there's like a larger change to the journalism economy. And we're seeing some kind of calls for reformation from world governments. The biggest happened in Australia, where they passed a law. I mean, pushed heavily by Rupert Murdoch, and make of that what you will. But essentially, requiring search engines and social media companies to share some of that revenue, right? So what this has meant, of course, Facebook or Meta and Google fought this strongly, but Murdoch got his way. What that meant is that this last year, there was a $200 million infusion into the journalism economy in Australia. And while, I mean, if you spread that over the entire country's, like all their outlets, that's probably not a ton of money, but that's enough to get some new reporters hired, right? With the election of George Santos, the representative from New York, it shows just like there were local journalists reporting on his stuff, but they couldn't get a widespread message across. And it does show just kind of the difficulty in having one or two outlets that are nationalized and have to report on everything. It hurts how we consume and get our information.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have broad thoughts about like Google gaming media and like Google being such a rat race as a part of it too. Like it's the most successful gaming news outlets, I think, are so SEO driven.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that the SEO system works with Google News and Google Rankings is like it rewards you for consistency and like sort of this like weird, and Google's like always really I mean, you're the Google reporter, Ahmad, you know this, like Google is always so touchy about talking about kind of how it ranks people in terms of reliability and credibility, right? So like once you've done it enough times, you've shown that you're good at it, right? That you are reliable in quality, then you get sort of this like weird kind of pin to you in the Google News algorithm. And it takes a long time for new websites to build that up. Meanwhile, IGN, even GameSpot, IGN, and some of these others, the Post, and because you guys are, a major news outlet, like when you guys are writing about gaming stuff, you guys get floated up into these things. And I think that that's like more broadly, I think that's part of what's affecting gaming media is that everybody's covering the same thing. And like I was saying earlier, they're not necessarily covering it in a way that their audience, what the gaming audience is used to. And the way that they are used to is fucking expensive, to be like frank, right? Like it's extremely expensive to create video content more broadly. The burn rate goes up exponentially, going from like having one writer covering a beat to having a writer, a producer, a video editor, like the whole thing, right? And building out this content. But that's the way that this audience consumes content is on video on places like YouTube. And it's like, there's just not like, I don't think anybody's figured out the gaming media formula is what I'm trying to say. And none of these companies have figured it out more broadly. And I think Google is an integral part of it because, I mean, fuck, I'm feeling this a little bit myself. Like I have a newsletter. I've broken 3 layoff stories in the past like 9 days. Everybody else is getting my traffic because they're aggregating it because I'm not like cached in Google News. And it's like, I mean, that's fine. Like my economic viability doesn't rely on that like some of the others. But at the same time, like kind of sucks. It'd be great, but it's like so hard to build that basically like domain score and get Google to be like, yeah, you're the one. You're like super reliable. And, we know you don't publish crap. So it's hard. Google does have an outsized effect on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know, I think you're right. And yeah, the post is a little bit more fortunate. I will say that the SEO doesn't really matter. So, for instance, if you look up launcher, maybe you can't find launcher because you find game launchers for all the other
Hmm.
games out there. So, yeah, it does really matter like what you call yourself and like how you put your headline. And if you're like always scrambling on deadline too, and you have to think about all these things, then it's all this additional pain points. And yeah, the VC funds who are investing in and the companies do not understand how games media works, and also the ad and sales sections, they don't know how to sell ads for your game media outlet either. So all of that is just resulting in layoffs.
I mean, and Shannon, I mean, it's good to hear that Launcher
Oh,
doesn't have to rely on SEO so much. Um, I will say, I was speaking to folks I know at the New York Times. I mean, and I'm sure it's the same with the Washington Post. Like, they do have to do some weird SEO optimization on the back end, which is, kind of weird for the publication with like one of the largest subscriber bases in all of journalism. But I did want to make one final point, and then and let somebody else chime in. Is that in regards to some kind of rev share model between social media sites, Google, and publications, Senator Klobuchar did attempt to have a kind of bill that would do something like that in the United States. And of course, Meta and Google lobbied it like crazy, and Ted Cruz ultimately kind of destroyed the bill in committee, I believe. But we are seeing both Canada and New Zealand, offer similar legislation. And if they're able to get it, passed, and if that means that outlets start opening up again, this could be a saving grace for not a saving grace for media, but it could be a huge help for media. So I don't know. I'm going to continue to watch this closely. And remember, Google is just going to continue to put profitability above all else. An area in which a lot of publications have been gaining money is through affiliate links, like our top 10 headphones to buy, and then the number one headphone gets a click on Amazon. The website will get some kind of money off of that sale. Google is now
Yeah.
elevating its own sales content up and higher in Google search, meaning Google is making that money now. So that's going to continue to move it. It's going to continue encroaching more and more on the internet, and it's going to force publications to like either do layoffs or find I don't know, other creative means to make money. With that, I'll hand back.
Yeah, I will say one quick thing about Google is that and one like more positive thing to talk about is like Wordle was doing very well last year. I don't know if you have written any Wordle articles, but that was a huge source of traffic for us, and that was like the most searched term above like I don't know Queen Elizabeth passing away and other like huge news, because Wordle is searched for every single day, and so it's not just like a once a year type of situation. So there are ways for media to become profitable, and still like and games media, but we just have to be really creative, and yeah, we're still figuring it out.
I think the other thing too, to your point about, is like the audience is not necessarily used to like forced monetization to go behind paywalls. I mean, candidly, like Shannon, you're one of the sections, like launcher's one of the sections of the post that doesn't paywall people, which is like obviously very intentional if you think about it. This audience really loves like voluntary participation with their money, like Twitch subscriptions and Patreon and everything else. Like it's very, this younger audience is very used to that. But you're right, like they're so used to, why would they pay for something that is forced when somebody else is going to aggregate it more than likely, right? And like that's the $1 million question. I've seen a lot of solutions that like excite me, but I haven't seen one that works. I was talking to like a company at the end of 2020 that was like trying to break in, and it was crypto, and obviously we feel very differently about the crypto industry now, and the more that we know after 2 years. But it was like a crypto web plugin that basically was like trying to partner with Condé Nast and a bunch of others to monetize passively with paid content. So like basically you'd pay one membership and get access to a bunch of exclusive content, and it would be like a web browser plugin. And I thought that was like really interesting. I don't think it really went anywhere notable, but like I like the experiments here a little bit. And because Facebook and Google are never going to like voluntarily hand over ad revenue if they don't have to. They're just going to farm your content some other way. So
Yeah, you just
yeah.
Oh yeah, you just reminded me like CNN did NFTs for a bit before they shut that down. So yeah, there's always people trying to venture into something to make more money, and it's like it's just not something that people have figured out yet. I've been thinking about this today too. I think like if you're a journalist, you just every day of your life you think existentially, what am I doing here? How will this be sustainable?
Yeah, and I think we all kind of feel that too. And like, unfortunately, like, you were mentioning earlier some of the like venture capital and PE people that are coming into the news or news business and like buying up these news organizations and figuring out how to slim them down, whether they actually understand how to do it or not. But like, I mean, news is a rich person's game. Like it's kind of what it is. Like the Post and the Times are both really good examples of this. Like the Post owned by Jeff Bezos, and it's like something he has other motivations as to why he owns the Washington Post in terms of power and everything else. But like, he's one of the richest men in the world, and this is kind of like a small part of sliver of his giant portfolio that is Amazon and everything else as well. And then you think about the same with the Times, like the family behind the Times, the Sulzbergers, like they are a very wealthy family, and they have been for a very long time. So like this is not, even though it's a public company, like this is not necessarily like news right now is just sponsored by rich people that feel good about it. Like basically, like it's a tough spot to be in, and I don't think there are too many rich people that feel very good about sponsoring gaming media yet at the time. And
Right.
the games industry also doesn't like the press generally as well. So
yeah, if you think about Fanbyte, it was owned by Tencent, right? And then that was supposed to be great, but then it went the way it did. And I think even if a rich person is sponsoring your media outlet, they still want you to make money. So if you don't make any money, you have to watch out still. So it's just hard all around. Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, it's also like the delicate balance here, and we're about to wrap up the discussion, but I think the delicate balance that I always have to find with this kind of stuff, and I found myself in this position with Fanbyte and G4, which were like so blatantly obvious. If you looked at the numbers and the content, it just didn't work. Like there's not really a nice way to say that. Like they just were spending money, like leadership was spending money completely incorrectly and making the wrong priorities. Like it's hard to find the balance as reporters. And I'm glad, Shannon, thank you for talking about this, because I know it's, in some cases, not easy, but like it's hard to find the balance of like critiquing where things went wrong, especially when like the product itself was just, I mean, it was just like off base and didn't sort of cater to what people were interested in, versus like being sympathetic and empathetic towards like workers being on their ass, right? Which is like, it's the hard part. It's like, you want to call the spade a spade, you want to talk about the business overall, but like, it's really hard to do that when, there are tens of thousands of people losing their employment and emotions are at a big high.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. So we talked about the business analysis part of this, but everything is. It's just not been a happy week, and people are very like trying to support each other. And there's also been like some people saying, oh, like nobody reads games media. Like fine, I'm like there's like petty comments as well, and it's just like not really the time for that because of just like it's actually people's livelihoods. And I was trying to put like a expert into my article of like trying to talk to this guy, but he didn't reach out, he didn't like answer me in time, but he had done a study or like he had research at Stanford saying that like layoffs also like hurt people's mental health, and it causes them to to be really depressed. So like it's not like it's also has like that physical toll on people too. So yeah, it's just terrible.
Thanks for watching Visionaries on YouTube. For more content, please subscribe to the Overcome channel.